Did you know that companies with a strong culture see up to 20% or higher productivity, and those with a toxic culture face a lot of turnover? And I just hear this buzzword, company culture. It's the backbone of every successful business, blah, blah, blah. Let me just say, you know what? Let's just have this discussion because if you are an owner of a business, a practice, a leader, you want to build a team that thrives and sticks around because guess what? You can't do your business without a solid team behind you. So stay tuned until the end. My name is Shri. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thanks for joining this episode where I'm going to be interviewing an amazing guest. I'm a social media manager who helps doctors and lawyers gain an edge online. We help your practice build a social media presence that attracts and retains patients and clients. My guest is the number one leadership speaker, best-selling author. I'm super excited to be getting to know because I always love to learn about different people and what they do and why they do what they do. So let me just stop talking and bring up Chris Dyer here so that he can be sharing with us his story. All right, let me ask you this. The Super Bowl is this Sunday.
Yes.
Are you all about the football, the halftime, or the commercials?
I'm actually in for it all. However, we have devised a nice little plan in my house when we have parties. One room is dedicated to people who care more about the football, and the other room is for people who have a little bit more care about the commercials. Because we've noticed that like some people really into the game and then people only there for the commercials and then they're talking during the game or vice versa. So we sort of noticed we kind of like two rooms, people can go back and forth, but this is the football room. This is the commercials and the Beyonce halftime room over here. So.
I am actually the one who's for the food. Like, I want to eat really good food, but at the same time, I'm also about the football. And obviously, if I'm not big of the fan of the teams, then the commercials and the halftime become more and more important. And this time we have Kendrick Lamar and Zia or C. I think I'm saying their name wrong, but if you don't know who they are, you just be like, okay, I don't know. I'll just go eat some more food.
Right.
So let's get into this, Chris. I'm really curious because I was reading about you. I was actually listening to a speech you made like 2 months ago. It's on YouTube, which I thought was really, really interesting. And so my questions that I have, and then that topic just, I was like, you know what? Let's just get into this. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about how hard it is to find good talent. And then they're talking about, then you have the other side. People are struggling with, the toxic work environment. But I want to go back to when you all started in 2001 with the
way back, right?
Can you believe that we actually say that? It was like 24 years ago.
Well, I mean, it feels like yesterday to me, if I'm being honest. It really does feel like yesterday. So
it does. When I look at my daughter, I realize like I just had her, but she is going to be 23 in July. But I want to ask this. What got you to say, I don't want to work for anybody. I want to work for myself?
Well, it took the Twin Towers going down. It took an epic terrorist attack for me to be like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing what I thought I was going to be doing with my life. I was always entrepreneurial as a kid. I had the lemonade stands all the time, made money all the time to go buy the toy I wanted. I didn't wait for Christmas. I didn't wait for my birthday. Like I would go make the money and go get the thing that I wanted. And yet here I was in my 20s working for somebody else who I didn't like, taking the very safe route, had the car payment, had the mortgage, and was like not very happy, but also not willing to go take the big risk. And that's what I'd always done my whole life. And so when that big event happened, it was this wake up call. It was this almost like a spell being lifted off of me. If you think about, it's almost like in Harry Potter, if like I was under a spell or something, and it was, so that was September 11th. By November 1st, I had a building, I had a company name, I had incorporations, I was working on my first client.
I'm just sitting back because I remember the Twin Towers. And I remember at the time I was dating this guy who was like, oh, the tourists took down the towers. And I was like, what are you talking about? It was terrorists. But just that moment, I realized things can change in a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And you don't know. I was on the edge of, should I become an entrepreneur? Should I work for someone? What do I need to do? And so you started a business, but I'm like really curious. Why did you go into background checks? Out of all the niches, background checks.
I mean, I could have probably done a lot of things, but I just happened to have taken this job with a background check company. I was helping open up hotels in Hollywood for many, many years. And I got tired of the commute, and, it's fun working in Hollywood, and it's also like grueling because the hours, the celebrities, the parties, you can get burnt out really quick. And I had burnt myself out. And we just happened to have a vendor who had a job opening, and they were very close to my house in Orange County. And so they offered me the job, and it was just one of those things like, well, I'll figure it out. Like, I don't really know a lot about background checks, but I'll learn and go figure. I was young, and I'll go figure it out. And I learned a lot, and it was a really interesting industry. But again, as I mentioned before, I really didn't like my boss. So I was working way less hours for like the same money, but it didn't, again, you kind of get burnt out of not working for someone you don't really like, and becoming an entrepreneur was the ultimate solution.
I love that you brought up you didn't like your boss. I can imagine that there are going to be people, because there's people who have liked and said they were coming to watch this, but they're not watching because they're a little scared to comment because they don't like their boss. So your experience of leading teams, helping others, what are some things that you learned in your experience of not liking your boss help you open your eyes to see what's missing in other companies?
Well, I mean, I learned this lesson right in that moment, and I continued to relearn this lesson over and over and over again in my career. And that is, what you are not changing, you are choosing. And so in that moment, I was choosing to have a bad boss. And later on, I was choosing to have employees that weren't getting the job done, or I was choosing to allow that difficult person, or that difficult client to impact us. There are ways in which, and this is where culture comes into play, excuse me, that really, really impact our ability to change our trajectories. And it's the people, it's the culture, and it's all of that around them that really makes that really big shift.
I love that quote that you just said. What you are not changing, you are choosing. Because how many of us are choosing to stay where we are knowing that we're unhappy? And I was talking to someone today who's doing a whole speech on zombie cultures because there's not a lot of change happening. There are certain niches like auditors who feel somewhat stuck because if they tell the truth or expose the truth, they get laid off. So how do you help people understand that their voice matters, and especially in a culture where it's like everything needs to be hush hush and look beautiful?
Well, every culture is different, but there is a very specific science to what makes a great culture. And you can do it in your own way, right? I mean, we know what makes a car, but there's very different looking cars.
It's a water break.
So sorry. I'm just getting over the flu. And I've been just fine all day. And then, of course, when I'm live on camera, I'm coughing. We know we can see the difference between a 1987 Civic and a Rolls Royce. I mean, there's different ways to do a car. It's the same thing with culture. So culture is a science. It is not an art. And so we don't have to try to make something up or whatever. We can go and look at these 7 pillars, figure out how to do those 7 things really, really well, in a way that matches what we do, the constraints on us. Maybe there needs to be secrecy, maybe there needs to be hush hush, maybe you work with high-end clients, or maybe it's everything is super confidential, maybe you're in medical, but all of those things can be figured out. And when we do that, leaders know what they're supposed to do and how to lead, and employees know, and they can start to guess and make better decisions on how to answer questions or how to do the thing they're supposed to do, instead of having to come back and ask 1,000 questions or have their hands held the whole time. Because culture creates the norms, and it creates the blueprint and the North Star of like, what is it people like us in a company like this do things like that. And that's so important, because otherwise you're like, well, I don't know if my boss is going to like this decision. My boss isn't here right now. They're at a doctor's appointment. I have to make the decision for the client right now. What am I supposed to do? Well, if you understand the culture, and your boss has been transparent with you about decisions and how they get made and why they get made, and how it is we come up with these, what is the thought process, and explaining the industry. Like if they've done a lot to really bring you into the culture, then making those decisions on your own are far easier, and you're more likely to get it right. And then the third part is, and if you get it wrong, a great culture will go, hey, that's okay. Let's explain to you and show you how to make the better decision next time, instead of yelling and screaming and punishing you and putting you on a PIP or whatever it may be.
I want to say hi to Andrea. She says, when I was talking about 2001, she said the Wayback Train. Yes, I went back. You brought up the 7 pillars and talked about how this is what helps build the culture. From your experience in working with so many amazing companies and people, what do you find that many struggle with the most out of the 7 pillars?
Well, there is quite a bit of variance for companies. However, I will say the one that they really have to get right in order for the rest of them to sort of work is the transparency pillar. And so this is where a lot of companies do struggle. Being transparent means telling people as much as we possibly can about as many things as we possibly can, so that they have the understanding. Now, maybe we can't tell everyone everything because that's just too much information, but do they have access to that information? Can they go find that out for themselves? Can they go look? And it shows up in lots of different ways. But before I explain that, it's usually the leaders or the owner or someone who's afraid to share that information. Sometimes they're afraid because they're not sure how their employees will react. Maybe they're afraid of letting secrets out or confidential information. Sometimes they're afraid because they're not making very good decisions, right? I mean, like maybe they're paying certain people a lot more than they're paying other people, and there's no reason for it other than, some arbitrary thing like, gender or whatever, or location. And so like sometimes they're making bad decisions and they don't want anyone to know that. So there's lots of different reasons that can kind of stop people from doing that. But what I found is outside of the, making a bad decision based on things like, paying men maybe more than paying women or something like that, it tends to be they misunderstand the employees' reactions. So we started giving our people our P&L. Here's our profit and loss every single month. Here's how much sales we did. Here's how much money we made. Here was our profit or lack of profit. And, really getting them involved in the discussion about how do we make money? What are our best clients? Where should we be looking to increase and push that? What clients are like our biggest clients? Like sometimes people didn't even know that like certain clients were huge for us. Like you might want to treat that client with like the ultimate whatever if they're bringing in like a third of the revenue. We had employees that had no idea. And so they were just treating everyone the same, which is a nice philosophy. But like on the other end, there's a reason why that company sends in so many tickets, because they're a third of our business. So you have to think about things in different ways. they started helping us find ways to save money. When they knew how we spent the money, they started saying, well, couldn't we, combine these two vendors? Couldn't we go out and get an RFP and see if we could find better prices? They started coming up with all these great ideas. After we started sharing our P&L, within 1 year, we were 35% more profitable. And I did nothing. I didn't tell anyone to cut. I didn't say get rid of things. I didn't say we're on a save money, year. They just started finding things on their own because they had the information that only I had and a few people on my senior team had. So, and there's tons of other ways transparency shows up in an organization. I could talk about sharing of goals and all kinds of other things, but like that's the first big one is to get transparency right. Because when people don't know the information to something, if they have to fill in a gap, if they know this part and they know this part, but they have to fill in a gap to try to figure something out, they pull from their negative experiences in the past. So I walk in and you seem like you've been a little grumpy the last 3 days and you're my boss and I don't know why. But the last time my boss was grumpy for 3 days in my old job, I got fired. Right? Or the company was in trouble, or we had money issues, or layoffs were coming, or whatever happened in my past. But if I just knew that you and your spouse have been fighting in the last 3 days and has nothing to do with me, you're just in a bad mood because things aren't good at home, like that's a totally different set of information that now I'm not acting in a different way. So the information to employees is the key area we have to make sure is working in order for our culture to run smoothly.
I want to say hi to Roger. As you were talking, he was saying this is so correct. And it's true. And it makes me wonder too, the lack of transparency, does it have to do with how you were brought up? Or is it really about the problems? Like, I don't want people to know that I'm making this bad decision.
It comes from fear. A lot of the parts of culture that don't work, where we struggle, they come from fear because we're afraid that people will judge our decisions. We're afraid that they will think that we don't know what we're doing. When as leaders, we don't. We're just happen to be in charge and we're supposed to be figuring it out, right? It's our job to eventually get it right. It's not necessarily our job to get it right every time. And so it's a lot of that fear. That's one part. So if we can get past that and we bring our people in and say, our company is all of us, and we all have to understand what's happening here, and we all have to be working together, and we're all trying to reach this goal. Speaking of which, transparency is also like, do people know what your goals are for the company? Do they even know what your sales numbers are supposed to be? Like, I've been in company meetings and they're like, our culture's terrible. And I'm like, cool. Hey, everyone, what's the goal this year? And no one knows. Like, the CRO knows what the goal is and nobody else knows what it is. Well, there we go. Nobody knows why we're doing all these things because no one has shared what our goals are this year. Right? So transparency is so key.
Roger is sharing, it's not just transparency, it is engagement. Participation is foundational to good governance. Now, Roger is an auditor. And, as you were talking about transparency, I've heard the stories about how getting just the information, well, we've been just doing this for so long, or you should be able to access it, or the lie of, well, I sent you the information, why didn't you get it, comes up. How does one navigate conversations like that so that they can get that information?
Well, I mean, if we're getting into like micro conversations and relationships and all of that, then we kind of can jump into another area that I talk a lot about, which is communication, and making sure that we're being very clear, making sure that we're making it as easy as possible for the other person or people that we are working with at that moment as possible to understand what it is we're trying to do what the objective is, what we're asking of them, because ultimately most people are dealing with an absolutely cluttered world. Now we've just introduced AI, right? So now we have AI and all this stuff going on that's crazy. And we have, social media and your phone and text messages and constant, like your emails going off constantly. And we still haven't figured out a way to protect ourselves from a lot of that noise. And we've just added another module of noise with the AI. And now we're hitting someone with, hey, I need that report. Hey, I need that thing. Hey, can you explain to me how to do this? And people have less and less patience. And so if we can make it as easy for them as possible, I call this being the sense maker, right? Am I the sense-making customer service person? Am I the sense-making salesperson? Am I the sense-making team member? I'm just going to make it make sense for you, make it easy so that you can, if you give me 10 seconds of your attention, you can understand what it is I'm asking or what I need and then be able to provide that to me. I'm not leaving it to chance that you're going to understand exactly what I know in my head. And that sometimes takes a little extra work, a little extra effort. It can be annoying, and you have feelings of passive aggressive feelings. My Alexa decided to start talking during the middle of that, so that was fantastic. Nothing like a live show. Chris is coughing, and now my Alexa has gone off. So maybe we should talk about the next pillar, which is mistakes, because I've made a few so far today.
You made it real. That's what it is. That's just what happens on this show.
It's crazy. She's never once talked on a thing ever. Did I say the word Alexa somehow? I don't know. But anyways, so if we can just make it as clear as possible for people, that will really help.
So now I say I'm curious because I'm truly curious, and I'm going back to when I'm 5 and asking, why does this work? Hey, Lisa. And if you're tuning in, this is Chris. I am Shri. And if you have any questions, drop it in the comments. I want to really ask them. And especially if you want to know how to get a copy of his books or anything, I'll make sure you know where to get them. But 2, there was a comment that was made before the show, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. The word culture has come up so often. This is from Erie Levi this past week for me. Culture is even within the same country. Different ethnicities view culture differently. And when a business or country try to make everyone the same, they lose out on the benefits of each culture and also can do a lot of harm. Just yesterday, my husband found a clash of cultures in his workplace, whereas one group, when offended, closes up and takes a break to calm down, the other drowns themselves in more work. Understanding even that small bit can make such a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is why it is so important at a company level. We want to create that larger culture and say, this is who we are. And people like us do things like that. And that's okay. At the country level, from a larger geopolitical thing, I think that would be a mistake, right? We have a lot more subcultures inside of a country. But in a company, it makes a lot of sense to say, this is who we are. I mean, if you're going to go work for Jeff Bezos, that's a totally different culture than if you're working at Google. They're both wildly successful. And you need to decide, well, which one is the one that I want to be in? When I look at their cultures and I look at how they work and I look how they deal with things, which is the one that I feel most aligned with and comfortable with? That's what's most important. And so we get people who are, the term rowing the boat all in the same direction. We're all working towards that same goal and we're working in similar ways. Now, that's at the very large level. Now you go lower, below that. We've all been in companies where you go up the elevator, go to the 3rd floor, and people are relaxed and they're working and they're high-fiving and they're having a good time, right? And you're like, I like to work here. And you go back in the elevator, you go up a floor, you open up, and it's like cold and it's quiet and nobody wants to be seen and they're all hiding from somebody. And it's the same company, right? So there are subcultures based on who that leader is, based on the department, the division, the work they do. And that is natural, but we have to make sure that those subcultures are congruent. They align with the larger culture in order for them to be doing great work.
You remind me, this story that, or just what you talked about, reminds me of when I worked for an oil and gas company. And you would just, even on the same floor, one side was so closed and the other side was so open. And you could feel even the difference, but it was all about the leadership. And this kind of brings up, what are people experiencing and what can they do to work on it? Lisa's saying she's loving this conversation. Roger says this, I like the sense maker. So I want to ask you, how can we get copies of your book, or have you come in and speak to us?
Yeah. So I speak all around the world. I do most of my talks in the United States, though. And my books you can find on Amazon. My latest book is The Power of Company Culture, second edition. But if you want to go to my website and fill out a form to have me talk to me, or connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or any of the places where we all hang out, I'm happy to connect with whoever and to help if you need help. So I help organizations a lot with their culture, with leadership, communication, and I also do quite a bit of sales kickoffs to help their sales teams as well.
You mentioned that you have the second edition. What's the difference between the first edition and the second edition? For those who, for me, I'm like, what's the difference? It just means that he has more worksheets and more questions, or what's going on?
Yeah. So if anybody out there who ever gets asked to write a book, the first time you write a book, you try your best and you don't do a great job. And I've heard this from pretty much everybody who's ever written a book, like multiple books. Like, you do your best, and then like the moment you turn it in and it becomes a book, you find errors and I should have said more about this, or I didn't get that quite right, or, whatever. So my publisher came to me and asked me to do a second edition. I about jumped up and down because I was like, there's so much more I had to say. There are things that have now shifted or changed. The examples weren't as timely. And so I went back and we added case studies with NASA, VaynerMedia, Gary Vaynerchuk's company, with Neiman Marcus. So that was really cool, able to add these 3 really big real life case studies into the book with, very modern examples of companies who have great culture. And then I was able to deeply expand. So the book is now twice as big as it was before. So anything I didn't like, I changed dramatically. I mean, I kind of almost nearly rewrote everything. Still follows the same format, but really rewrote everything because I don't know. I never felt quite right about that first edition. It was fine. It did its job, but I wanted it to be the culture book, and that's what we turned it into for the second edition.
I've written a book. I was part of the book process, and it's out there, and it got recognized and everything. But looking back, I would not go down that route again because I realized I got screwed on a lot of it. But like you said, it's like even where you are today with the culture, with your leadership style, you learned from patterns, but you can still get better. Mm-hmm. So for someone who's catching this show, the replay, or listening to this episode, because it'll be uploaded tomorrow on the podcast, Adventure of an Entrepreneur, what are some practical steps leaders can take away today to improve their company culture, especially in businesses that are struggling with disengagement or turnover?
Well, if for the average leader out there, I would say the first thing that you need to go back and do is radically change your meetings. So if you're having the same meeting over and over again, like every time we meet, it's a 30-minute meeting or it's an hour meeting, like the monotony that you are creating and the lack of excitement that you are creating for these meetings, we don't often think about it. We're just like, oh, well, let's call a meeting. It's 30 minutes. The amount of insane improvement to culture that we created when I started having a bunch of 15-minute meetings, 25-minute meetings, 30-minute meetings, we had 45s, we had an hour, we had all these different meetings at different lengths. And we went back and worked with the team and figured out like, hey, if you just need to work with someone quickly, if you just need to know like the answer to a question, like what's the shortest amount of time we think we can do that? And they were like 15 minutes. Cool. 15 minutes. And then we set rules around that meeting. There's no talking about our lives and the weather and all of that. There's no how do you do. This is not a time to check in. It's show up. Hey, here's my question. Okay, let's figure it out. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye. We're done. And creating that allowed people to be like, oh my gosh, I can call a quick 15-minute meeting, get my answer, and I don't have to sit and chit chat with Bob and Sally for another 30 minutes. I'm going to blow my head off. Like that kind of gave them that freedom. And then then they knew, okay, but then when I do have to be on the team meeting for an hour, then I can come in and be my best teammate. And I can care about everyone else's lives, and I can be invested in what's happening, and I can really connect, because we're only going to do that like once a week or twice a week or whatever it is on this one particular meeting we have. And all the other ones, I have permission to show up, be business, get the thing done, and get out. And so we created all these different types of meetings, and I have those in my book. I'm actually happy to send them to anybody. So if you text me 33777 and put my name Chris as the message, I will send you a list of questions that you can ask your staff, and also some breakdowns of these different types of meetings that I love to use for free. And the second thing is to start surveying your people once a week. Ask your employees one question every week. You can do it anonymously sometimes. You can share all the answers other times. Just let them know in advance. Who's killing it for you? What resources don't you have? What question have you been too afraid to ask? What client is driving you nuts? Just asking them these simple questions, and then coming back and saying, this is what I heard. This is what I'm going to do about it. This is how I can help. This is the answers I can give you, the information I can provide. It's like you're taking a little temperature check every single week with your team and asking them something different. The amount of growth, the amount of change is insane by just doing it a question at a time and not waiting for that stupid, ridiculous annual survey that people like to run. Ditch that, burn it, and start asking a question a week.
And there you have it. That's a really good detail, step-by-step, what you can implement right now so that you will just say, you know what, I don't need to ask if, I need to ask, how can I get Chris to my company? How can I get on a call with him today? And for those of you who like to stalk people, please stop stalking and just be a friend and just reach out and say, I really enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed what you had to share, and reach out to him. And we have Roger saying, I love the idea of weekly surveys, but will people get tired?
I'm shocked no one ever got tired. We had 95, 96% rate for almost 10 years I did this, of people consistently responding. So if they had a week they didn't want to, some people did, or they were on vacation or whatever, it was fine. But because I was responding and I was doing something, they always wanted to give me their 2 cents. They always wanted to say something, because it wasn't just going into a form that no one ever read. Right. I was saying, I asked you who's killing it, who's doing an amazing job for us. And you all, like 90 out of 100 of you told me Steve. So Steve, we're buying you your lunch this week, right? Like you're doing amazing. Keep it up. Like you would recognize Steve. And so everyone was happy. They told me, everyone saw I did something for Steve, right? We actually did things like gave him an extra 5 days of vacation for the week. Like we would do big things, right? Like if you're working that hard, I also know Steve needs a break, right? And we would do things like big gestures when we would ask those questions. But it was, again, because I'm only asking them for one question, and we noticed they got tired if we asked them 4 or 5 questions in a week. It was like at one time. But if I asked them just one a week. Now, to Roger, I did it at about 45, 46 weeks out of the year. There were holiday weeks and certain weeks that I just didn't happen. And so there was a few breaks in there, I guess, during the year as well.
And he's telling you right now, this is good to hear. I will try that. And Nora says it's always about the questions, beautifully articulated. Now, guys, I hate to end the conversation here, but we are going to go to Instagram. I'm inviting you to come and join us because, of course, if you have questions that you didn't get answered now, you can have them answered on Instagram, or better yet, just connect with Chris. Reach out to him, text him. What's the number again?
So you text 33777, and then the message you put in there is just for my first name, Chris. I think that's US and Canada only. If you're outside of that, you may not be able to use that. So if you are outside of that and you want that guide, you can go to the website and fill out a form, or ask me on LinkedIn or wherever you want to find me and just ask me for that. I'll send it to you.
And Roger saying, I think that is a great feedback system for management in times of change, learning a lot. And I want to say thank you to everybody who joined in on the live, who's listening to the replay, who's listening to this episode on the podcast, because we love to get feedback. We love to know that you're reaching out to the guests and just saying, hey, what you shared was so helpful. I want to work with you. And again, make sure you connect with Chris because he's super cool and I like his glasses. And that's, one of the reasons why I look for cool. No, I'm just kidding. I do like your glasses and you are super cool. So until my next live, which is next week, have a wonderful day or evening. And thank you again. And come and follow us to Instagram because that's where the party is going to be. Until the next time, everybody. Bye.